I felt really bad. I was invited absolutely in advance to participate in this Congress, and I was very honored with this invitation. And so to say, I started to think about what's it about criticism and the position and role of critics and how I imagine it in the future. And at one moment I realized that I can't imagine this future easily, and for sure I don't imagine this future as a very bright one. Here I understood that I can't produce an academic type of paper for the Congress to satisfy all the listeners and different types of public, and I blocked. I was desperate. I didn't know what to do with it. And then Jure, he said that maybe an academic paper is not something so necessarily for the Congress, and I decided that I will try actually to present you my own problems with criticism, and my talk now will consist of 3 introductions, 1 memoir, and several steps through the minefield of art criticism today, and all those steps are totally not steps to heaven. I named this paper "What Might Save an Opinionated Art Critic in the Minefield of Alienation from Her Subject." The problem that I experienced by myself. I was educated as a traditional art historian in the Moscow University during deep socialist times. I studied this absolutely typical classical 19th century traditional, very deep and very serious art history. And partly 2 positive things. When I studied it, my art history, first of all, was not so much Eurocentric, or now we are making this joke, NATO countries centric. We had different types of historical courses about African, Asian, Latin American art. They were, of course, not so full and not so elaborated as European cultural history, and in particular, I even can't say today in 2013 Russian art history, because it was all the time, as Dorota today mentioned, the art history of the Soviet Union, which means that it's totally and absolutely not only Russian and absolutely not European. With all those, so to say, modest luggage, at one moment of my studies in the university, I chose to deal with contemporary art of that time, which is mid and late 80s. And at that moment, I realized that actually there are like 2 different professions. Because my profession in my mother tongue is actually not named so beautifully like historian of art as it today, or I don't know, visual studies professionalist. It has a much more modest explanation. What is it about? It's about knowledge in the field of art. So we are named искусствоведы, which is about knowledge about art. So it could be historical, you would guess, and it could be maybe some other type of knowledge that you maybe can invent for yourself. At one very particular moment, what we named, now it's late totalitarian period, but we simply named it the Brezhnevian stagnation of the Soviet Union in the 80s. I decided that I would prefer to deal with contemporary art. And at that moment in my university studies, I realized that actually there are 2 very different expectations from people who study art history and plan to work in a museum. And this was only one option at that time, that art historian goes to work in a museum, and usually it's a state or municipal at least museum. This person has to know a lot and to learn with eyes. Has to recognize a lot of different types, artifacts, artworks, artists, periods, geographies, and so on. And from the person who decides to specialize in contemporary art, nobody expects big historical knowledge. Our teachers were saying, you will deal with contemporary, okay, you don't need really, you can skip some things about like late Renaissance or something. But there are another expectation from the person who's supposed to deal with contemporary art, means what it's to deal to contemporary art. At that time in the 80s, you could work in some publication or publishing house, but you have to write. So art historians had to memorize by looking, and we had to memorize by reading and writing. I would develop this idea, and I would say from art historians of my time, nobody expected to be able to write. to shape up their idea, to have ideas, first of all, and then even to fix the ideas on paper. And from people who are supposed to deal with contemporary art and to be, let's say, critics, today we can say it in this context, nobody expected to have knowledge, but everybody expected that they quickly, easily write nice things. So somehow being in between, because contemporary art at that time was somehow historical contemporary, I understood that I have to learn how to write. Nobody explained well how to do it, because the whole teaching of methodology of art criticism started, let's say, with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and ended somewhere nearby. So it was all about very particular situation of methodology of criticism when the critic belongs to the public and tries to express the position of the public. He is a knowledgeable, educated person who is on the side of the public, like in a soccer game, but for sure not inside of art production and art presentation. So this was about my memoir of my education. And then when I was thinking how I can talk how I can talk about criticism today, I remembered that there were three important elements that I understood about criticism. One of them was when for the first time I was reading a text of a British academic economist and researcher of economy of culture, whose name is Samuel Cameron, who still is teaching, he's a professor of economics at Bradford. And he looks like Iggy Pop, actually, which is interesting for a professor of economics. And he wrote a text on the role of critics in the culture industry in mid-90s, at very optimistic times of my life and of the life of our part of Europe, that all those days we are somehow cruising around. Because in the mid-90s we thought that we can very quickly to become equal, if not economically, to culturally, we could do it very quick. So in his text about role of the critics in cultural industry for the mid-90s, the idea of cultural industry looked like another nice utopia. He classified the role of a critic in four very simple and very clear elements. The first one, the critic is the person who transmits the information about the artifact to the potential consumer, to the buyer, whomever this buyer is. This informational role is very important. Dr. Samuel Cameron discusses, is it possible for the critic to somehow mislead the consumer, and what could be the reasons of this misleading of the consumer? And found out that there is no absolutely reason, because critics internationally are not shaping up a critical market. There is no such thing as critical market, because critics normally are local. And even in those places where they are understood and they see themselves as international, let's say for simple things like in New York, they're local anyway, because the events and things that they write about are not so well known outside of the territory where they can really see and understand things. So the idea of economy of cultural industry, that informational function of art criticism, maybe is the main function. So we're supposed to inform if we are doing criticism. This I'm sure everybody knows, what, when, where, and for whom. This is all those questions that you're supposed to answer when you write your short text, one of the first texts about art event or artifact, trying to be a critic. Actually, at this moment, from my point of view, if you're a critic who informs, then you are somehow already involved into publicity machine, because you help publicity of the event or an artifact, or maybe an artist, an author. So you're part of the publicity, which is a very important element of the industry of culture, of marketable culture. Another function and form that the economists of culture see in criticism, or mainly in activities of critic, is very important and very mighty function to create or to bring down the reputation of authors and artworks, which of course definitely is absolutely helping to the economy of culture. And it's this important function somehow almost looks like in the hands of every individual and potential critic. So if you dislike something, you can find words and you can invent reasons to make things unpopular. But it happens that statistically it's totally impossible because, for example, the most followed and somehow the most involved and included into studies of economy of culture, criticism about Broadway shows and Hollywood movies proves that if critics write very positive, the mass of critics write very positive reviews about Broadway shows, it can decrease the amount of visitors because people start to think that it's too professional, too elitarian, and maybe it's too complicated if all those critics somehow so positive. So it could be absolutely subversive decision of the audiences. Instead of like running to this event, they would decide, no, maybe something is wrong with it. The same with Hollywood movies. You can hire and pay critics and they can write about it. But again, if it's too positive and everywhere all the voices are super positive, it's proved by statistics that audiences react negative to absolute and total love by professionals towards this or that product of art and culture. So it happened that the problem of forming of reputation is based on the reputation of individual critic who does not belong to the group or to the family or to the tribe of similar professionals. And in this case, you have somehow, first of all, to work on your own reputation and then to sell your reputation together with your criticism and your critical text, and then maybe you really can influence the creation of the reputation of authors and artworks. Strangely, that the economist of culture thinks that criticism could be absolutely self-sustainable, pleasurable activity for professional critics, that they do it because they enjoy it. They actually is not thinking and somehow are not dreaming about possibility to influence the art scene, to communicate with the producer of artifacts. They do it because they like to do it. Something about strange explanation why people are writing poetry. But in this case, it means that you have to write pretty well. If you want it to be this absolutely isolated product of, so to say, fine writing, you have to be a pretty good writer. And the fourth reason, which is a very interesting reason for cultural economy, but I think that today in some places, at least in the region of Eastern Europe, actually I have to put some brackets in the region of Eastern Europe. I usually, because maybe of my some particular specifics, I include the former Soviet Union and big territory of Russia, because I think that when we exclude them, our situation, our analysis is not balanced enough to discuss processes and dependencies. So it's possible that criticism and the individual art critic would like to influence some aesthetical theories and some much more bigger scale, more important, but very academic things. In that case, up to the economy of cultural industries, you would recognize this type of criticism because it's usually written with very ununderstandable language, uses a lot of quotations, and sends you to a lot of different sources in different languages. But it happens in the logic of the creative industry, it happens that the renommee, the reputation of the critic depends on some other elements of cultural industries, for example, of an economical standard of cultural producers and the place and this location where the critic works. And here, again, to some small part of my personal memoir, what I'm showing here, which looks very strange, is the so-called Biennale Online, which happened this year. I was involved in this Biennale. I received an invitation to be one of 30 curators of this Biennale Online, initiated by very famous and deeply respected by me curator Jan Hut, with very strange logic. You can invite 5 artists. They have to send digitalized images of their works. People will pay for the entrance to the Biennale Online, and they can select, they can sub-curate their own inside selections. So this is the group of curators, very well known, absolutely elitarian people are among this group with huge experience. And when I saw that all of them somehow think that it's possible now to curate online, to see even 3D objects or time-based objects as flat and 2D on your screen, but make selections, I decided that I will try to do it. This is a short list, part of the list of artists who are involved into this online biennale. The online biennale almost had no topic, had no any regulations. Curators didn't know what other curators submit. Nobody was sure if the artists would manage the technological requirements to upload their works. And at the end, it was this strange economic utopia of cultural field that everybody will get money at one moment, yeah? Because so many people would decide to visit Biennale online, they will pay the entrance fee, and then we will share all those money, and we all will be rich people, young artists, all this huge crowd of curators, and so on. I'm afraid that very few people visited this Biennale online, and it became for me one of the very strange somehow disappointments on one hand, and another nail into the coffin of the utopia of new media and digital and virtual reality. Plus to the Biennale online, I became incredibly famous in very tiny location of my country, Bulgaria, because I was invited as one of 100 selectors to select an exhibition named 100 Days, 100 Curators from the collection of SAACI online, which is a collection of more than 70,000 artworks. And I did this selection. 70,000 artworks, I had to do it in 1 month. It's absolutely physically impossible to see all the works. So it was a little bit, I would say, like random selection. And I did this selection, and at one moment, because of the name of SAACI, different types of public media started to call me and to ask me how I motivated my selection, whom among Bulgarian artists I offered into this selection. And unfortunately, there were, among all those, let's say, 200-300 entries that I checked, there were no Bulgarians, so unfortunately I didn't select any Bulgarian artist. And then the artists from the collection SAACI Online, which is an open platform and everybody can submit a portfolio and images there, artists started to send me information about themselves, press release, things that they are dealing with. For a couple of months after this SAACI Online thing, I became so popular that I really couldn't manage my mailbox. 2 online interesting events, both of them are somehow para-curatorial tasks, but both are incredibly visible, and it's a lot of talks about them. They became super popular. There is no critic involved in both of them. Actually, criticism here is minimalized. It's like zero performance of criticism in this case because it's absolutely selection. There is even no all those serious elements of curating because you know how things appear online, like say artistic portfolios, one by one, you are not even arranging connections between things because nobody will notice them. It's a random search. You can jump on one of the artists whom I selected and then to one who is selected by another curator. They would never be connected. So it's really a very strange thing. This was one part of things that influenced my disappointment in what criticism could be right now, later at this moment. The second part of my disappointment actually is much older than online possibility to curate, to buy, to sell, to present, to become famous, to hack, and to pirate and so on. It was an article by Boris Groys about critic of art as a commentator. It's an old one. It's like 15 years old article with which, no, more even, it's 97. So it's even more than 15 years old. This is the text in which Boris Groys, first of all, is doing very nice metaphorization about, for example, labels in exhibitions, labels of artworks in exhibitions. He names them the bikini of art, the smallest element of clothes that art has to have in a show. And then he constructs the whole story around this bikini of arts, and he talks about that art today can't live without text. because everybody expects to have a text. At least you want to know the name of the artist, the title, and maybe sometimes even the year of the production, so you would like to read something. And because we already all the time in different exhibitions which expect us to look at, we are reading things. We are ready to read more and more, so as more texts you write and put into the show, it's the text of 97 by Boris Groys. I think that James Elkins today already mentioned that Boris Groys is changing his positions and opinions pretty quickly. But this text was very interesting. So you have, up to Groys, write very complicated, totally untransparent, absolutely ununderstandable, very long text to put it into the exhibition together with artifacts there, even to put them into competition with artifacts, because this will produce much more respect from your audiences, and this will produce much more respect towards artworks. My observation is saying that there are some limits of text that you can put in the shows, and sometimes we even overplay with it. But the whole position of Groys that is about criticism which lives and is produced by an exhibition, that it's not this old-fashioned gaze of the person from the position of educated member of the audience. It's a position of somebody who is inside an exhibition, who is co-author together with artists. And when you're co-author together with a modern artist and even postmodern artist, you can do whatever you want, because if I say it means criticism, they say it's art, and we believe that it's art. So then if I say it's criticism, it's supposed to be criticism. And my audience is supposed to look at the text, if the texts are in the show, or maybe will compromise and they will be only in the catalog, this type of commentatory text or explanatory text, something which translates images into language. My audience is supposed to respect me on the level of the artist. It's up to Groys, it's not me. Yeah, I'm trying to, so to say, read Groys today. So up to Groys, art critic supposed to be equal to the artist, but better than artist, because he's not producing. He's a distant person. He has a distant gaze, so he for sure can judge the artifact which already produced by another author, but nobody can judge the artifact of the art critic who works parallel at the same time and even in the same place as the artist. And the third, so to say, motivational element comes from one selection of texts which I read once in The Guardian. It was named Our Critics' Advice, and different critics who write in The Guardian about different things, they explained how to be a good critic and how to write your critical text. And some of the explanations were very useful. You know, read a lot, go to the exhibitions or events that you write about, pay attention to what artists want to say, listen to the artists, listen to your older colleagues, you know, respect the profession and so on. But one thing which I liked sounds like criticism isn't about how you feel about something, but why you feel that way. Interesting that for me, the most important is not the difference between how and why, but the word feel. I live all my life in the position where the critic is analyzing, not feeling. I mean, feeling is too simple. We are not feeling. We leave it to the audiences. We prefer to know and to criticize and to analyze. So when it's still possible to deal with feelings in and about art criticism, I started to gather those feelings for this presentation, and that's why I counted several steps on the way to feel better as a critic and to find out what are the new tools that can help you to feel better in the profession that even today we discuss nobody expects and nobody needs so much. I don't know if it belongs to every country of late socialism, but in my, so to say, countries of my two strange, sometimes conflicting backgrounds, it was a very unpleasant joke for critics that they know how, but they can't. Something about the impotence of creativity. And that's why people become critics but can't be artists. So the first thing that I understood how I perceive criticism today, and not only today, but since, so to say, the big political change and the fall of the Berlin Wall together with the appearance of all those nice utopias about new media and dealing in this global space of people who think together. Mailing lists, the first elements of criticism. People who are included into mailing lists, what they write in those mailing lists, what they mention, even at all, if they mention something, names, events, artifacts, new media, new type of approach, new type of presentation, different type of language. Mailing lists were very important. What I'm showing here is one of the oldest mailing lists. It's V2, based in Netherlands. This is the most famous maybe event, which is not like mailing list event, but based on the mailing list of V2, the Deep Europe presentation. I tried to select mainly things that are connected with Eastern Europe, post-totalitarian space. Eastern Europe and how it deals, in this case it's 97, I guess, it deals with Western Europe, and today we're saying former East and former West. This is another topic which maybe I reach a bit later. So mailing lists, they could be professional, they could be local, they could be national, they could be global. You can make your own mailing list because you believe that you have people around you with whom you can share and find common opinion. The syndicate and the V2 mailing lists were the first ones in which I participated. I became a member somewhere like in '96. There were incredibly smart people, mainly dedicated to new media art, new types of ownership on art, ownership and private property online. It's still before, you know, us being so interconnected and all together wired. This was one of the last utopias where people really believed that it's possible not to know each other but share some ideas and some beliefs. This was the actually already very early in '97 they published as a small book the user's manual, V2 East and the syndicate, and it's the whole mailing list and exchange of emails. Actually all those who are interested in the understanding why, for example, I don't believe so much that Eastern Europe is such a periphery, because it started to get rid of this feeling of periphery and this inferior complex already in 95, 96, and 97, being incredibly super advanced compared with former West in the terms of new media, art, and communication. This is possible to be found, and then, of course, because it's about new media, all the archives and all these type of things you can find online, and you can still go deeply in and to see how simple, charming, and nice design of the 90s, online design of the 90s. This is one of the biggest mailing lists in which I ever participate, which would pretend to be a network already. It's NetTime mailing list, and it has really very good archive. Somehow people forgot that this mailing list exists. This is how the archive looks again, totally not designed. Again, this zero performance in designing of online things. And here you can find a lot of very significant texts about what art is about. We somehow at that time we imagined that art will not exist in the form in which we know it today. Let's say in 2013, we were sure that up to the year 2000 all the problems with art market, with money, with centers and peripheries will end up because we have this new equal space of online communication and contact. And of course, the last and totally not least, the most important maybe, and somehow its importance is underlined again, it's VOTI, the VOTI mailing list, I'm sorry. This was the mailing list of curators, VOTI Union of the Imaginary Curators Forum, and this Curators Forum was invented again at the end of the 90s for curators to exchange their ideas. It was a core group of curators, and now the interest towards, I have several contributions, that's why I have the access to the PDF of the VOTI publication on such early stage. It was about why and how to deal with art and why we still with this condition, and what is about curatorial profession today and this globalized world and this decentralized world. People were asking questions, some answers were given, very different sometimes. This is the logic of a new publication that presents VOTI, and all those mailing lists for me are instruments of art criticism, because people actually easily express their attitude and their understanding of different elements of cultural infrastructure, art production, and art presentation. They talk about it much easier than if it would be more traditional publication in some printed media that you have to compose, you have to keep very particular language, you have sometimes to be subaltern to the politics of the edition and so on. And this is only one example because it's almost 500 pages. This is the suggestion of Hu Hanru to discuss a museum and a shopping mall. Would it be a possibility to have a museum and a shopping mall? And as all of us we know, yes, this possibility now exists, and there are a lot of museums and shopping malls and even non-commercial art centers and shopping mall, all those things that at the end of the 90s, I guess it's a sarcastic question at that time, you know. I guess Hu Hanru expected the answer, no, of course, they're totally different things. It will never happen. They're totally different domains. The next meeting with today's criticism that happens to me, at least, it's something that I name the press release criticism. Our respected colleague from Denmark, he already expressed his disbelief that it's possible to name curatorial texts, or I guess even press release texts, as critical ones. But because I observed how professional marketing and PR departments in some of the most powerful institutions are working, and of course I'm writing a lot of press release by myself. It's a criticism, very specific and very important, because what words you use and how you use them actually is absolutely concentrating attention of your reader, or you can manipulate your reader that he or she absolutely in a different way understand your project and your exhibition. This is, for example, how the ICA Sofia, which is a tiny institution of 12 members, how the ICA Sofia prepares important press release. In 2 days, we have more than 50 emails in exchange because everybody changes words and edits things. The majority of people who are involved here are artists. But for them, it's incredibly important how the press release, something in which they're involved, would be presented on this first level of reading to the wider audiences. And then, being honest, we all know that if you write press release well, then the majority of mass media will repeat the words from your press release. They will never, ever even visit the event, and they will never, ever read your catalog or whatever more complicated text that you have, but they will use nicely all the proper words. So to work on a press release and to find proper words for me is incredibly important. Interesting that press release we expected to be written by dealers or the particular departments in galleries or by curators when it's a smaller scale event. But for example, lately I understood that many artists started to write press release about their exhibitions, or for example open studios, because they don't trust curators and critics and whomever, people who are not them. And they write by themselves using all those proper words that they insist all others to repeat and to use, which in the logic of cultural economy, of course, influences their reputations and position, first maybe not on financial markets, but later on financial markets as well. So journalists and editors of mass media and periodicals, they usually use your press release, and they even insist that the press release is supposed to be somehow to give them the keywords and to give them the clues. Of course, the best education in the writing of press release and the most accessible, as all of us we know, it's eFlux, which is a mailing list at the beginning and is a huge distributor. They told me that they have 2,050 clients, which means that 2,050 institutions or individuals pay to eFlux to submit information about their events from 500 cities, more precisely 496 cities. So eFlux is the most powerful institution that gives us information and access to different things. I read press releases of eFlux. Being honest, I read up to one moment all the press releases that I received by eFlux, trying to learn how to do it the best possible. Then somehow I stopped to read it, and now I'm very selective. eFlux for one moment was not super selective, but now they are more and more selective. Again, my selection of examples is done based on the logic of former Eastern European artists, because they are like global artists and they exhibit everywhere, but at least I know them from their native countries. Ivan Grubanov. It's an old one. It's an old example. I specifically searched in my, 2007. I searched in my archive. But eFlux now, as for sure you know, they publish a magazine. This is not even correct. We can't even say that they publish a magazine. They collect and design a magazine, and then everybody who likes for free can print this magazine and distribute it in your venue, or keep it for yourself if you prefer paper reading. Funny part about meetings with criticism and its new tools. I was doing in the AICA Sofia this printing of the eFlux magazine. They give you even an opportunity to put your own cover image on the whole edition. And we were trying to distribute it for free, but it happened that we are, Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria, where I live, has 1.5 million population, and we have a gallery of almost 50 square meters, and last year we had 1,200 visitors. Nobody wants a paper copy of the eFlux publication. Everybody is saying, but I read it online. I mean, why you waste paper? I was impressed. I remember times when whatever you can get from a gallery, you usually take it and bring it home. It was very important as memorabilia. Now everybody is saying that they don't need anything paper. They prefer everything to be absolutely online and to read it from the monitor. Another thing that I wanted to mention is, of course, lately my beloved two instruments of criticism: online social networking, Facebook and Twitter. Why I think that Facebook is such a critical instrument? First of all, there are so many different people, at least in my Facebook collection. There are not so many, but I really value all of them. I become friend only with people whom I know personally or whose reputation I know. And for example, I start Facebook reading with my very distinguished friend Jerry Salz. This is the critic whom I read every time when I have this opportunity. And he has a very nice blog, very tough. He announced this blog at the beginning of this year, but he posts on Facebook a lot of his critical texts. And I don't have any other opportunity to... this is the page of Jerry Salz on Facebook. I mean, we live in different territories. He is, of course, what you would say is absolutely international critic, but for me, the events that he discusses are not international. They belong to the place where he lives. But the language, the attitude, and the scale of his writing, this is what impresses me seriously. This is one of the latest, actually 2 days ago, entries in Facebook, and then it's this online publication, Vulture, of Jerry Salz. Then on Facebook, I usually read, I select some of the artists whom I know and whom I like very much, and when they post something about visiting exhibition or meeting young artists, and there's such artists whom I know, for example, Yuri Albert, Russian artist living in Cologne now. I'm reading Gelatin from Vienna. Very often they put a couple of words in the Facebook about what they saw and what young artists they met and what crazy art life is going on in Vienna and other places. And then I check the names and I check what's going on. The same with Twitter, which is so short, 147 signs. But for example, cultural technologist, former director of the newest museum in Russia, in the city of Perm, and private dealer Marat Gelman, was already 3 years in a row, he is awarded as the most tweeting person in Russia. Yeah? He tweets more than politicians. So I'm following his tweets as well, and I'm pretty well informed about Russian art, all the on stage and behind the curtains events and things that happen there. Opinions on Twitter could be criticism as well, because they're usually motivated, and if you know the personality to whom the opinions belong, somehow you can understand the context and the whole situation. It helps you very well for your orientation in much bigger world than you, only your own art scene. And yes, of course, it's another instrument and another funny tool that maybe not everybody loves so much. They are ratings, lists, and awards in arts. I know many artists who every day check this website, artfacts.net, which has this short list and long list. This is a short list, 100 names, top 100 names. And they have, and somewhere there is written that they control or follow or whatever more than 60,000 artists, individuals on the planet, and put them in this some system, one after another. I copied here some of the some parts of this list. Actually, again, it's type of self-ironical attitude towards what those lists and what those selections and what this, which is even not very clear on what logic of selection those lists are based. But I can tell you once this artfacts.net helped me a lot during the presentation of a very nice artist in whose potential I trust seriously, to very well-positioned critic of not former but pretty serious West, when the critic all the time was saying, but why you think that it has a potential? And I said, at one moment I said, check the artfacts.net. He is on 187th place there. Can you imagine among 60,000? And actually it helped me and the artist to explain the importance of this thing. Yeah, this is numbers after 500. And except those things, of course, there are some other, for example, my mother country every year producing this list of 50 the most influential people in contemporary Russian art. What's interesting, and it's usually a jury announced who selects those 50 people. The most interesting, there are very many artists among those 50 most influential, and it doesn't mean that those artists are rich or they have galleries or they somehow can manipulate the market or exhibition processes. They are people with opinion, and they appear in these lists of importance. And here's something with which I maybe somehow try to wrap up the situation with criticism and this deepest minefield. I founded an award for art criticism in 2007. It's a very modest thing. It's like a tiny award. The name of this award, it's of course local, it's for Bulgarian young critics, the Essential Reading for Art Writers Award. I am trying to find very important and interesting and useful from my point of view of person of my generation, publication of texts somewhere abroad of my country, and this is actually the prize itself. And then the AICA Sofia, we are obliged to follow writing about art people in our country, and then we somehow form a jury and we select somebody. So several years there were very different awardees in our tiny thing. This is the artist Buriana Rosa. This is the graduate of cultural studies. The award is the book. Usually I'm giving this book. But once, I'm sorry that there are 3 images and I'm on all of them. It's not because I thought that it will be dark and you will not see me properly beyond the microphone, but it's because I'm giving this award. Here, this case with which I would like to finalize my talk, why it's a minefield. In 2011, we had a problem because the most interesting critical writing happened to be anonymous blogger named Nothing Personal. The person in Bulgarian blogger, the person who was twice a week published a text in between, let's say, standard 2 and 7 pages of criticism, very elaborated, opinionated, and educated person whom we have no idea who it is. We were trying to manipulate people to tell us. We were trying to analyze text. We were trying, to trick other people to tell us who it is. We never found out. And at the end, we decided that we give this award, this book, it's a collection of critical essays and institutional critique and after, to this anonymous person still hoping that it's one person, not a collective, not a school of critical writing, let's say. The problem happened in between us. Again, we're 12 people only, between, let's say, 55 and 34 years old. The problem was that some of the people said that it's impossible to award a critic when it's anonymous, because anonymity, first of all, it smells on socialism, and it smells on those anonymous letters that you write to your secret services about your neighbors. And if you really critique and you want to say something, and if you really have some ideas, you have to be another type of a heroic socialist life. You have to come on stage and to say, this is me. I love you or I dislike you. To be very open, very honest, to be very loud. And we had this huge debate about, is it possible or not? But it was so good as a quality. There are very few young people. I mean, there is no money in critical writing. I don't want to talk about that because I'm only about instruments of critics, not about instruments of the infrastructure. So we decided, okay, we will do it. Every time when we have this award, we organize it on one or another independent, small exhibition space of contemporary art in Sofia and some other cities. So here, within a tiny former garage space, we don't have to whom shake hands, you know, and things. And we left this book there. And we asked the owners of the space, you know, to make a photo. It's really like a very bad criminal story for young kids. To make a photo of the person who will come to pick up. Because we informed the person through mailing list, of course, you know, you are awarded. But it happened that this person really didn't want to be recognized, and he sent a kid, you know, a small, like 5 years old kid, who said, I'm here with an envelope, and an envelope will please give this kid my award. So it was the huge, you know, huge narration about how to be anonymous. And after we informed media, you know, classical news media about this award, it was a huge, huge problem for the anonymous critic. People started to write, who are you? And who give you the right to write about our exhibitions, achievements, our dreams, our life, our bleeding hearts, and not naming yourself. For sure, you're an agent of this and that, I don't know, George Soros or CIA or KGB, or we have our own nice things as well to be the agent of. And at one moment, the most unfortunate, this thing that started like that, you know, it wasn't like really, in 3 days we had those publications. Funnily, being a crazy archival person, I archived all the entries of the Nothing Personal. And after we gave the award, up to date, it stays like this. No publications, no information, totally nothing, absolutely. The person had disappeared. We still don't know who is it. I mean, I can't check. I can't visit persons' libraries and to check if they have this book somewhere or not. This is how the opinion that the critic is somebody to whom somebody gives rights and somebody who has to and who must be, and it's only public profession and it's profession of responsibility. But if the person takes responsibility about the text and opinion, but not explains how and why, not contextualize the opinion, others don't like it. They actually technically hate it. They don't want it because they have a beautiful substitute, and this is my last image, lifestyle writing as criticism today. The best and perfect, seen and heard of Art Forum Diary that everybody reads as well, beautiful photos. You can see everybody who visited events. You can read in a very nice manner what happens, what was the catering, who was dressed in what, and what the most popular bag of the season was at this event. But it's criticism. Independently on the language, there are really incredibly smart and professional people are writing it, and David Rimanelli and Jablonska, they're both, at least whom I read usually. They're beautiful, nice texts. That's why, actually, I think that criticism today has much more tools than it used to use. And we have a lot of problems with those different tools because maybe we can't make a choice. My recommendation, actually, to make a choice. Or there will be artists like this Dutch group, Fucking Good Art, which produces publications inside of the exhibition to which you invite them to participate. They criticize you during the process of preparation, through the opening, and the whole exhibition to which they belong. They do this in their amount of publications for the shows in which they participate. If we will not use all the instruments we have, the artists will come and will do it instead of us, as they usually do it instead of all other professions of the former infrastructure of art that can't keep it together with the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iara. Now, questions, comments, please keep it focused. We have just a little time until end.
I thought that was so fascinating. I just had a seminar with Boris, and he told me that he wrote, his last review he wrote was, it was a negative review, but it got great placement, great picture, and they loved it. So it was very interesting. And then he said he never wrote another review. I haven't checked, but. And then he also, it became like this discussion about what is the, I just thought it was a wonderful presentation, because we got in the discussion of what is the, how do you disseminate what's new? And, you know, Kickstarter, that's something you didn't cover, like to go into Kickstarter, which alone gives you publicity and maybe even brings you some money. But he was saying, but that puts you out too early before the art season, you know, so he's grappling with it too, even after all the thinking he's done on it, you know. But the anonymous story was just amazing, because is it criticism if there's not a person behind it taking responsibility for what's being said is a
Can
very
be
good
the whole
issue.
art school, you know. It can be the whole art school. I really don't know.
Yeah. But people like the criticism until when the award's given, and then, you know, but before that it was appreciated. And then all of a sudden it was condemned? Is that?
No, I think actually, you know, that criticism today is much more dialogue than it was before. And it's not because maybe the critic itself, him or herself, would like to be in a dialogue with the subject and object of criticism, but because everybody thinks that you can answer. It was not like that before. Before it was this really positioned above superior critic, but today, you know, you write a text or even you say something, and then the artist comes and said, I disagree. You didn't understand. It's not right. I'm much better.
But can we see that as an evolution in consciousness? I mean, you get an instantaneous feedback loop, and together we're on this road to a higher consciousness. I mean, maybe it's just calls for a new interpretation of criticism, ultimately.
But I think that criticism can be a dialogue. It's only a little bit more difficult because the distance between the critic and the author is more close, so it's more complicated, yeah, because you know people and they know you. But I think it's even more interesting than if you write to, let's say, beyond all the reality of things.
There was a question. Sorry, there was.
Yeah, thanks. When you talked about the person of the critic and also like the anonymous critic, I want to ask your opinion, and maybe what do you think in general, what the public thinks is more important, the quality of the writing or the person of the critic, and the article or the review or whatever to be accepted? Like
the quality of the writing.
You think so? Or
but
isn't it like that you also said that the anonymous critic, the people who he or she was writing about went outrageous that how can somebody write about us if he or she doesn't have a face? You think people or artists accept, like a person who is accepted, high-profile scholar, whatever, or an important art critic, he criticizes their show and they will say, okay, but if it's some student and maybe his or her writing is extremely good, but the artists just don't accept the critique because the person has no credit.
There, of course, I mean, because criticism, how now we discuss it, it's a very public thing. So, of course, there are different elements. Yes, of course, if you want somebody to write critical text about you, and this text to be for sure a step in your successful career, Yes, then Lisa gave this example, ask Boris Groys, even if he writes negative things, it will help you because people who search on Boris Groys' name will see your name as well. Huh? This is a very nice way. But if you really, specifically young artists, if you really would like to understand what you are doing and why, maybe it has sense to read something more substantial in the terms of difficulties of understanding, reading this still unknown visual language, somehow to go in. At the end, anyway, we have all those sources online, and when you search something, you know pretty well that you search for a good piece of text for quote, but not so much for the name.
Iara, sorry. Hi. I wonder if how you would describe the relation between the content or the style of the criticism and the medium. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. I think that with Jerry Saltz and Facebook, I think he's a perfect match for Facebook because I'm not talking about like these separate articles like the one you showed, which I've also read, but I mean his Facebook feeds. Mm-hmm. It's a perfect match because as a critic, he's deliberately unprincipled. Like he claims to reinvent himself in front of every new artwork. He has no theories. He has no consistency. That's the mark of an interesting critic. This is his positionless position. Facebook matches that perfectly for him because he's forever coming out with all sorts of new, as quickly as he can, new questions like can you be a mother and a painter, that kind of thing a couple of years ago. So in a way, Facebook mirrors his own philosophy and is a perfect form to content match. But I wonder how you would, if you think about that in these other cases, if there's a form to content match with a medium and the kind of criticism that happens in the different venues. Or to put it differently, not too many critics would work that well on Facebook.
I mentioned Facebook actually and some other social networks because it's still a new thing. It's still a new thing to have a serious attitude to the text that you can find there. Yeah, of course, another type of criticism exists, and that's why I quoted Groys, who said if you write totally ununderstandable and very complicated, it's better because anyway, somehow you protect the subject of your writing. So do it as complicated as possible. And he has some examples of such texts. And they are not on Facebook, but they will be in Facebook very soon because, it changes so quick. You really select around you people whom you would like to read or to know their opinion, or you would be proud if they would somehow hear your opinion. All this primitive system of liking in the Facebook, which is like so simple, and we are very ironical to it. I know people who really enjoy when they are likened so much in a short time, So, critics specifically, they need some boost to self-esteem, I would say. So maybe Facebook is not so bad.
I think that the anonymous critic can be two critics or three critics, as it's not allowed to be two critics. You can be two curators, you can be two journalists doing journalistic work, you can be two painters making a painting, or several painters, artists making a show. But it belongs to the idea of art criticism to be alone, to be individual. And I always think that's a bit strange. I mean, it's possible to work together and agree on a review, but it never happens. So maybe this anonymous critic is several anonymous critics.
Yeah, the problem of anonymity, of course, it's the problem of the net, and even those who, how could I be sure that Jerry Saltz is really Jerry Saltz? I have no proof, so to say. But some anonymity you are ready to trust and some not. It was a joke that it could be collective critic, but collective critic exists. The audience is the collective critic anyway. I don't know if in so to say Western logic, whatever quotation marks to make here, is this book of visitors' writings where they're supposed to put their opinion is still at all popular, maybe even as exoticism. But I remember it so well in many museums and exhibitions from Vienna, with Igor Spaniol, who decided that it's from Vienna to the east. They still exist, and people write there. And this is your critic somehow, If you like, you can even somehow, read it and follow it. Dangerous, but again, it's this collective critique that you have. Thank you.